Hi, and welcome to What's New with Lean Startup, your go-to source for the latest insights and practical strategies for transforming how your company builds new products and services. I'm Ben Hafley, CEO here at the Lean Startup Company, and in this series, we dive deep into the Lean Startup, exploring how to apply it effectively in today's dynamic business landscape. In each episode, we'll break down crucial concepts, share real-world examples, and provide actionable advice. So whether you're a product leader, a corporate innovator, or a technology executive, you'll find valuable takeaways in every episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our channel for more expert insights. Don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below, and we'd love to hear from you and answer your questions. Lean Startup is a customer-centric, evidence-based approach to vetting, shaping, and de-risking new business opportunities. And since our Lean Startup co-founder, Eric Ries, wrote the international bestseller, The Lean Startup, back in 2011, Lean Startup has really been known for its core methodology of running rapid cycles of build, measure, learn loops, and we'll cover that in a future episode, using experiments, running minimum viable products, and really actionable metrics to learn directly from customers as much and with as little waste as possible. So this has not changed. The core method remains as valid and as well used as ever, and it's the primary method that venture-backed teams are expected to operate in entrepreneurship curricula at business schools and accelerator programs around the world. What is new with Lean Startup is we've learned that leveraging this methodology in combination with broader operations and strategy is a powerful driver of success in a corporate context. We've identified 5 additional elements of the Lean Startup framework that, when combined with the core methodology, offer an approach that has transformed the way teams are building new products and businesses.
So in this series, Ben and myself will unpack what's new with Lean Startup. Ben, why don't you kick us off by telling us a little bit about your background and how did you come to be the CEO of Lean Startup Company?
Yeah, sure. So basically, a lot of experience with startups, coaching, mentoring, and being part of startups. Also was a product manager and into market research at Caterpillar. So I had kind of a corporate role, and I also was working with a lot of startups at once, and then actually helped build the kind of corporate innovation function at Caterpillar that we call Lean Innovation, and actually hired the Lean Startup Company to come in and help me with a project in China, and it was super helpful. And so then when there was an opportunity to come over and actually join the team, I jumped at the chance, and that was over 5 years ago, and I've been the CEO for about the last 4.5 years at this point. What about you, Jonathan? How did you get here?
Yeah, well, similar background in some ways. I was running or an early member of teams at startups, kind of early in my career, and then found my way into some large corporates, primarily in the educational technology space, and was having a really interesting time being challenged by corporate culture or how to build products. And a seminal moment for me was when I was speaking to some teachers about a product that we were building and learning that maybe we weren't going down the right path. And the corporate leader who was running the program sent me what was essentially a cease and desist letter, which was like, do not speak to teachers. We're building this thing and we don't want to learn anything new. And that was like, I got to do something about this. And that's when I really got exposed to Lean Startup and then became a consultant working with corporations and bumped into some folks who were like, hey, we're starting this thing, Lean Startup Company. Do you want to join us? And that was back in 2016. And I've been having an amazing time since.
Awesome.
So in this first episode, we'll give you an overview of the broader framework that defines our updated perspective on the Lean Startup. So we're going to talk about the method in a little bit more detail, the teams that are going to implement the methodology, the milestones that guide the teams, and the governance, essentially the leadership group that consumes the team's output and makes investment decisions. And lastly, the strategy that defines how and why decisions are made, and the culture that informs the behaviors of teams and leaders that are celebrated and rewarded in the context of the Lean Startup.
So the part of Lean Startup that most people are familiar with is the core methodology of build, measure, learn. And this actually starts with learn, where we're asking ourselves, what are the most critical assumptions about this particular opportunity, whether it's a new business, a new product features? What are the most critical assumptions that we need to test right now so that we don't end up assuming those are true and then getting all the way to the end and finding out we've built something nobody wants? So once we've identified what those critical assumptions are that we call leap of faith assumptions, we go to the build part of build, measure, learn, which is asking ourselves, what's the most minimal and yet still viable experiment that we could build in order to test those next most critical assumptions? And then in measure, we actually run the experiment, come back to learn and say, what do we need to learn next? Or do we feel like we have enough confidence to proceed? So that's the core methodology that's really at the heart of the lean startup. So Jonathan, I think you had an interesting story about the build, measure, learn methodology that's a little close to home.
Yeah, really close. So, yeah, my favorite recent example of this, it's amazing to me because it's actually my son's first startup. So he's been working to identify a meaningful problem for educators. And that's obviously kind of laughable because there are so many problems. But he started really thinking about the classroom instruction and the challenges of multilingual environments in New York City where he lives. And, how might modern technology such as AI, how might it help with this? And they found some customers who are willing to engage, but it was super difficult to get them to even talk about it. They called every teacher they could get hold of, but they couldn't find any traction. So they said, all right, maybe let's look for another opportunity. And so they pivoted, found in the new opportunity also a similar lack of traction. They just couldn't get people to say this was a big enough problem to care about. And then finally, they found a problem with a particular customer segment that showed like a lot of pain for those customers. So they went to conferences, they found lots of customers complaining loudly about the problem. And they built a quick and dirty demo. They used that to run some interviews, and they gradually increased the fidelity of the demo as they learned more specifics. And then finally, they had enough to offer up a solution for a paid pilot, which they were able to sell to 4 customers. And so they're running experiments all the way through this. They pivoted until they found a problem worth solving, and then moved quickly once they'd really identified what they should focus on to confirm real traction. So to me, that's in a microcosm the entirety of the Lean Startup methodology, like playing itself out over the course of several months.
Yeah, it's a great example. And it highlights the fact that build, measure, learn can be used to test not only products, but also problems, customer problems. It can be used to test go to market strategies, business models. All right, Jonathan, if you could tell us a little bit about the next element, which is teams.
Yeah. So when we discuss teams in the context of Lean Startup, it's really crucial to think of this as something that's really fluid, right? So the team that starts the journey using the methodology may end up being very different from the team that moves into, large scale execution mode. There are no rules about the specific size of the team or the functions needed, right? Again, that's going to be highly variable. But what is a critical concept is that you should keep the team as small as possible for as long as possible. So the more people that are on a team, the more those individuals need to be fed with work, whether that's engineers who are looking for stories or UX contributors who are looking to build interfaces. By being small and nimble, we're avoiding the need for huge amounts of documentation. Everybody who's on the team knows what's happening and everyone is wearing multiple hats. So with a small cross-functional team of maybe 2 or 3, it's almost impossible to get to scale, right? Or at least it used to be before no-code tools really meant that solo founders and solo practitioners can really develop massively complex products. But for the most part, the crucial point with the team is to keep it as small and nimble as possible, and only to add resources once traction emerges. Once it does, then we've got a really great case for why the extra resources are needed. So Ben, why don't you jump in here and talk about what's your favorite example thinking about how teams operate in a lean startup environment?
Yeah, I think in this case, there's so many specific examples that tell the same story. I'll just maybe talk a little bit about why chartering is so important when it comes to implementing lean startup. So a lot of people say, "Hey, let's just get people trained on lean startup, the method, and everything will be great." It's helpful in many cases, right? But if nobody knows if it's their job to do it or not, it can go sideways pretty quickly, right? And so, one thing that we do with all of our clients across, product teams, corporate innovation teams, technology teams, is we do some chartering up front and say, who's actually going to be on this project? Who has time? And who are you going to be holding accountable to do the work. Because if this is just something that's interesting that people can use if they want to, they're not going to use it because everybody's busy. Everybody's got a day job where they're already stressed out. They're already working too many hours. And so why would they run experiments? And so in the work that we do with big companies around the world, every one of the teams that we work with, we do some chartering up front and say, who's the team lead? Who are the primary and secondary team members? We have specific criteria and definitions for each one of those. And it doesn't sound very exciting, but boy, does it help, right? So just getting clarity on who's going to do the build, measure, learn work, super important.
Yeah, and it's amazing, isn't it, how many of those meetings we go into, and the sponsors or others who are in the mix have said, "Yeah, we've got strong alignment," and then we have the conversation. It's like, "What am I doing in this room? I didn't even know I was supposed to be here or what we're talking about." So yeah, it's a hugely valuable part of setting the team up for success.
Totally. Okay, well, let's talk about the next element then, which is milestones. So, we've talked about the methodology, which is build, measure, learn. We've talked about who does the work, and now you think about the team needs a map, right? So we need to get from A to B. Well, how do we know if we're making progress on the way from A to B, especially if we don't have any traditional accounting metrics yet, like revenue or market share or return on investment? All those are by definition zero because we haven't built anything yet. We haven't come out with anything yet that's a product in the market. And so this is a big part of innovation accounting where we're looking for leading indicators of future impact. So these milestones tend to be different for every company that we work with, but the themes are the same, along with some kind of a trend towards validating a customer problem to be solved, validating that our solution has traction in the market, validating that our go-to-market strategy is the right one, and just our overall business model. And so layering kind of the milestones in that teams are going to be held accountable for reaching, were super important. And also blending an appropriate amount of desirability, feasibility, and viability into each one of those milestones is a little bit of an art and a science. And we're going to do a future episode on what makes a good set of milestones. So, Jonathan, do you have some examples of milestones that you feel comfortable sharing?
Yeah, well, I'm going to start with an anti-pattern and then a positive example. So the anti-pattern is when teams are working towards a particular milestone. Let's say they're working towards validating that the solution actually is valuable for the target segment. And they do all this work, they run some experiments, and they get to a meeting where they're presenting for the purpose of advancing through a milestone. And leaders who are listening to them weren't expecting that to be the work that was done. They're like, hey, you know, that's all good, but where's the business case that shows revenue in year 5? And the teams are kind of looking at each other and saying, well, that wasn't what the definition of the milestone was for us, right? So why are you asking us about that, right? We often call that kind of running into the leadership buzzsaw, right? Where there's just an expectation that's not aligned. So making sure that you've documented that there's high clarity and high alignment around the milestones is really powerful. And so, a sign of, an emerging mature team or an actually mature team when they're working with really effective milestones is that they have the confidence to come to leadership and say, hey, this milestone, which in this case might have been validating the go-to-market strategy, we've been working on a variety of different experiments, trying to get some organic growth, trying to really understand our customer acquisition costs. And what we learned is we can't sell to our first customer. We can't get over that first hurdle. So the idea of going to scale with a go-to-market strategy and marketing team and sales and all of the expense associated with that, we've clearly run into a roadblock here. So our recommendation as a team is we should not advance this initiative through the milestone. Right. And that's a powerful moment, right? It was the milestone which helped them understand we're not making progress. And so they're able to say effectively, hey, look at all the money we just saved our organization because we didn't charge ahead with a go-to-market strategy that was fundamentally flawed.
Yeah, it's a great example. And it's part of the governance element as well. And by the way, all 6 of these are interwoven, right? So making a decision on how your company is going to apply this framework on one of these elements also involves thinking through the impact on the other 5 elements. So, Jonathan, if you could help set up the governance element, that would be great.
Yeah. So we're using the word governance here to really mean how decisions are made by the leaders who are managing a portfolio of initiatives, or products, or businesses. And one of the biggest challenges for leaders when they're managing that portfolio, when they're leveraging lean startup approach, is that there's a high level of uncertainty about what the teams will actually deliver into the market. And that can easily slip into chaos if there isn't effective governance. So, we've got one team in the portfolio that's pivoting, another that's moving super fast, and, got some traction charging ahead, and the third that they're kind of floundering, right? So there's a lot of different moments in the journey. And so how do the leaders give their teams the appropriate amount of autonomy to explore an opportunity space while at the same time, really maintaining understanding of what's in progress and retaining the capacity at the leadership level to make course corrections as needed. So in this context, the role of leaders isn't about knowing everything and being the font of, wisdom. That's impossible given just how fast markets and customers and tech are moving. So instead, their job as leaders is to push teams to make a recommendation. Should or should we not invest in the initiative? So they're asking the right questions rather than having the right answers, and they're demanding a body of evidence, right? So it's not enough to say, should we? It's how should we and how do we know? So maybe, Ben, you can then, jump in with a good example of where you've seen governance play out in the work that we do.
Sure. I guess I'll start with what comes to mind is I was doing a presentation on lean startup at an academic institution a couple weeks ago. And when I talked about governance, they said, oh, that's the growth board. And I found that interesting because I haven't, first of all, growth boards are still around, but it's not a hot topic anymore. And I said, well, it could be a growth board. It could also be a guy named Chris. It could also be a product council. It could also be, an existing body that just has this new role of managing this framework. And so the kind of governance that you have for your framework needs to be tailor made for what you're trying to do. And I think that's really important. There is such a thing as too much governance, where the executives or the executive is all up in the team's business all the time. There's constant check-ins, so the teams aren't actually doing the method of build, measure, learn. They're just making pretty PowerPoint slides for the governing body because they don't actually have time to run experiments because they're checking in all the time. We've also had clients, Jonathan, and you and I were just on a call with one of these earlier, where there's too little governance rather, where, teams are told, hey, we're going to give you a big check and, come back to us in 6 months and let us know how things are going. And if you need more money, we'll give it to you. That's too little governance. You're not actually holding the teams accountable for running rapid build, measure, learn cycles in the method element. So we're getting to the point now where even with just the first 4, we're seeing how you really have to design this overall framework for you, whether you're using this as a product organization, a corporate innovation team, an R&D unit, whatever it is that you're running through this framework, the governance and all these other things really need to be dialed in to be appropriate. So Jonathan, maybe you could set up the next element then, which is strategy.
Having a well-structured strategy is a crucial element of leveraging lean startup. It filters into each of the elements we've discussed so far, actually. It's essential for framing what gets into the development backlog. If teams don't know what their leaders care about, then employing the methods to learn, they won't know what good looks like for the organization. So it dilutes their entire focus on learning. Are we learning about the things that our leaders care about? Don't know, right? So it informs how teams are governed through the milestones as well, and how the portfolio is managed, because it gives the leadership the opportunity to say, are we on strategy? Are we off strategy in terms of what we expected the portfolio to look like at this point in time? And then finally, we're going to get into culture in a moment, but it really informs how the organization is going to operate, right? The strategy dictates a lot of the cultural boundaries that are going to be in place. These are the important things that we care about. This is our North Star for our focus, but this is the behaviors that we're going to encourage and support as we do this work. So, Ben, do you want to add something here in terms of an example of where strategy plays an important role?
Yeah, and I think I'll go, anti-pattern for this one because this element is one that seems maybe simple or let me take that back. I think it's an element where our clients say, "Don't worry, we've got that covered," and then it comes back to bite them. And so, numerous cases where the client that we're working with has said, "Hey, you know what? Just train our teams, help us set up the milestones and everything. We'll take care of the kind of the strategic alignment and the governance piece on our own." And there's one in particular with a client that was really unfortunate, where the teams did really good work. Two teams did really good work applying Lean Startup to two different initiatives. Came back to the governing body, and the governing body said, "Why were you working on those two things? You should have been working on that. You should have been working on these other things." And so that's really disheartening because the team put everything into doing really solid experiments, and they just weren't strategically aligned from the beginning. So coming back to the kind of that chartering process, it's making sure that the initiatives that any teams that we're working with are strategically aligned, not just so that the teams are working on things that executives want them to work on, but also if you're not strategically aligned, then the chances of the thing that you're incubating or building actually getting implemented are very low because if you do a good job of vetting, shaping, and de-risking some new product or business or feature, but then it's not aligned with what you're supposed to be working on in the first place, it's not going to get executed. So you're wasting your time incubating something that's never going to go to market.
Yeah, I love that. It's such an unfortunate reality for teams when they uncover that way late in their journey. Not great.
Totally. So Jonathan, I think especially the last two, when we've been talking about the governance and the strategy, we've been alluding to culture. So maybe you could set up this final element for us.
Yeah, it really does seep into everything, doesn't it? It's not this discrete element that sits on its own. It surrounds and touches everywhere. So, you know, a cornerstone of lean startup culture is a strong belief in evidence over conviction, right? It doesn't matter how good your presentation is, how solid your history is in the domain. It also doesn't matter if one of the leaders who you're working for proposed the idea initially. Right? If the evidence isn't there, leaders need to send strong signals that they just won't support the initiative, right? What that does is it really puts learning on a pedestal. It says that as long as we're learning, there is no concept of failing, right? Because as long as we're moving forward with strategic speed to identify and double down on great opportunities, and therefore just reducing a little bit the dominance of operational speed, then we can have a culture that really can support entrepreneurship and agility, which is the whole point for us implementing a lean startup framework. The other element of lean startup culture that stands out for me, and there's lots, and we're going to spend time digging into this particular element in an upcoming episode, but the one that stands out for me is the avoidance of waste. Right. So this is grounded obviously in, for those who are familiar with agile principles and the Toyota way, and it's a crucial element for us in lean startup, right? At its heart, what it's saying is, let's not congratulate ourselves on getting a product finished on time. Especially if we say, wow, it was on time and it was on budget, right? If no one actually cares when they get their hands on the product. So from an operational perspective, that translates to building in customer outcomes all the way through from the earliest ideation to scale deployment. It also means rewarding teams in a different way. It's no longer just about the number of lines of code or the speed of delivery, though that does need to be fast, right? It's really also about measuring different set of things like engagement and organic customer acquisition, right? These are things that shift our focus just away from revenue. Again, that's important, right? But the culture tells us we don't want to let it dominate, right? So we want to give customer value an equal seat at the table, so we're not wasting our time building products that get out there on time and on budget, but customers don't care about. So Ben, I'll let you weigh in there after that description.
Yeah, I mean, not much to add on this front other than we've seen companies that kind of nail the first five and don't think about culture, the sixth. and it can still go wrong, right? Even though they've got, everybody understands the methodology and the milestones. We know who's doing the work. We know what we should be working on, and we know how governance works. If we don't have an eye towards the overall culture within which this framework is operating, things can go sideways. And so really trying to ask ourselves, what gets rewarded, what gets celebrated, and is that consistent with some of the principles that are inherent in lean startup that you've mentioned? So nothing further to add on that front.
I'll just throw one more thing in, just because it's such a fascinating topic. There can be such a thing as too much culture, right? We worked recently with a client where there were tons of, I would say like dozens of slide decks focused on culture. And yet it was kind of a little bit of, yeah, we've done the presentation of that, but we don't need to really focus on our behaviors associated with that, right? And that's a real problem. That comes down to what we've talked about in other contexts, as theater, right? So if we're saying innovation theater or lean startup theater, we've got some really great posters, we've got some really great decks, but we're not doing what you just said, which is celebrating and rewarding actual behaviors.
Okay, so this does it for our first episode, where we're going through kind of those 6 critical elements of the lean startup. It's not just about the methodology. That's an important component, but the methodology itself is necessary yet not sufficient to really getting the kind of transformation that most of our clients want. So these other 5 elements are absolutely essential to achieving that impact, and we'll be going through each one of these in more detail in future episodes. That wraps up another episode of What's New with Lean Startup. This series is brought to you by the Lean Startup Company, where we help companies transform how they build new products and businesses. You can find out more about us and how we serve our clients at www.leanstartup.co. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our channel for more expert insights. Don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below, and we'd love to hear from you and answer any questions you may have. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode.